A man is missing from this story, not one of the victims, not the killer. The man who is missing is the investigator who opened the first refrigerator in that Brussels basement in October 1997. His name was never published. He never gave interviews. But colleagues who were there that day said he walked out of the house, sat down on the curb outside, and did not speak for 20 minutes. Nobody asked him what he had seen. They didn't need to. Inside that basement, beneath a quiet terraced house in the Molenbeek district of Brussels, forensic teams would spend the next several days cataloging what they found. Human teeth pressed into the dirt floor, bone fragments, a kneecap, clumps of dark hair, and inside those two refrigerators, pushed against the far wall, what the official forensic report described in the flat language that pathologists use when ordinary language is no longer adequate, as large pieces of unidentified human flesh wrapped in plastic. The walls had been scrubbed, thoroughly, repeatedly. Someone had spent real time on those walls, but blood soaks into old concrete in ways that effort cannot undo. Under ultraviolet light, the walls told the whole story. They lit up like a map of everything that had happened there. And there was a smell, sharp, chemical, permanent, the kind that gets into your clothes and stays there. The forensic team recognized it immediately. Industrial acid, not the kind used for cleaning pipes, the kind used for dissolving things you need to make disappear. The man who owned that basement was not hiding. He was not on the run. He was upstairs, seated at his kitchen table, speaking with a journalist in a calm and measured voice, wearing a modest cardigan, holding a cup of tea, and smiling a small, patient smile, the smile of a man who believed, with complete conviction, that none of this would ever catch up with him. His name was Andras Pandy, 70 years old, trained theologian, Protestant pastor, religious education teacher, respected member of the Hungarian community in Brussels for 4 decades. His neighbors described him as polite and quiet. His former students remembered him as strict but fair. His congregation trusted him. 6 people were dead because of him. Most of them were his own children, and he had hidden every single one of those deaths for more than a decade, not through luck, not through chaos, but through meticulous, patient, intelligent planning that investigators would later describe as some of the most elaborate concealment they had ever encountered. The Belgian press would give him 2 names, Vader Blaubaard, Father Bluebeard, and de Duivel's pastor, the devil's pastor. They were both right. This is his story, and it is worse than you think. Andras Pandy was born on June 1st, 1927, in the town of Chop, a small settlement in what was then the eastern edge of the Kingdom of Hungary, today part of western Ukraine near the Slovak border. The records from his childhood and adolescence are sparse. What is known is that he received a theological education, was ordained as a Protestant pastor, and in the early 1950s was living in Hungary proper. In October 1956, the Soviet Union crushed the Hungarian Revolution with tanks. Approximately 200,000 Hungarians fled west before the Iron Curtain was sealed again. Pandi was among them. He crossed into Austria and made his way to Belgium, where he built a new life with methodical efficiency. He joined the Hungarian Protestant diaspora community in Brussels, secured a position as a pastor, and obtained work as a religious education teacher in Flemish secondary schools, a role that gave him income, respectability, and a place at the center of a trusted community. In photographs from this period, Pandi appears unremarkable, modestly dressed, slightly overweight, thick-framed glasses, silver hair. He does not project menace. He projects ordinariness, the kind of man whose face you would forget 10 minutes after meeting him. Colleagues described him consistently using variations of the same phrase: quiet, intelligent, and somehow impossible to fully know. One former associate said, "He always had that little smile, like he knew something you didn't. You never quite reached him." In 1957, Pandi married a Hungarian woman named Ilona Soresh. They had 3 children: Agnes, born in 1958, Daniel in 1961, and Zoltan in 1966. The marriage ended in divorce in 1967. The 2 boys left with their mother. Agnes, the eldest, stayed with her father. She was 9 years old. What followed over the next decade unfolded entirely behind closed doors. Pandi isolated Agnes from every external relationship, from her mother, from friends, from anyone who might have offered her a different perspective on her situation. He made himself the center of her entire world and systematically removed everything else. By the time Agnes reached adulthood, she had no independent sense of self. Every decision she made, every action she took, ran through him. Psychiatric experts who examined her during the trial described her condition in clinical terms: a person whose individual identity had been so thoroughly dismantled over such a long period that the line between what she chose and what she was directed to do had effectively ceased to exist. This psychological dynamic, this complete ownership of one person by another, is the central mechanism of the entire case. Everything that followed grew directly from it. While Agnes was growing up in that isolated household, Pandi was conducting a parallel operation, quieter, more deliberate, and aimed in a different direction entirely. Beginning in the early 1970s, he placed personal advertisements in Hungarian-language newspapers, written under a pseudonym with a fabricated professional identity, a successful, educated, financially stable man living in comfortable circumstances in Western Europe. The ads described him as seeking a serious long-term relationship. They carried a specific tagline printed in both Hungarian and French: "European honeymoon." The target audience was not accidental. Pandi was reaching specifically for women who were economically vulnerable and drawn to the idea of emigrating west, women who had few options where they were, and who might be willing to take a chance on a stranger offering something better. He corresponded with multiple women over the years. Some came to visit, some left. Others were never heard from again. 2 women, Eva Kinch and her sister Margit Magyar, later told investigators they had each responded to his advertisements independently, without knowing the other had done the same. Both arrived in Brussels expecting what the advertisement had described. Both found instead a situation they did not recognize, controlled, isolated, with no clear way forward. They survived because they eventually compared their experiences, confronted Pandi together, and refused to stay. He let them go. Eva Kinch told journalists after the case became public, "We feel like survivors. We did not understand at the time how close we were." In the late 1970s, through one of these same advertisements, Pandi made contact with a woman named Edith Fintor. She was living in Hungary, married, with 3 young daughters: Tunda, the eldest, then Timea, and Andrea, the youngest. Pandi pursued the correspondence carefully. He presented himself as a stable, family-oriented man with genuine intentions. Over time, Edith left her life in Hungary and relocated to Brussels with all 3 daughters. What she found there matched nothing she had been promised. Edith and her daughters had entered a closed environment from which, over the following years, they would each disappear. But before the disappearances began, one event changed the timeline of everything. By 1984, Pandi had turned his attention to Timea, Edith's middle daughter, who was still a teenager. In 1986, Timea discovered she was pregnant. The investigation would later establish that Pandi was the father. This was the moment that broke something irreparably. Agnes, who had spent her entire life being conditioned to see herself as Pandi's sole companion, reacted with an explosion of violence that reflected the complete collapse of everything she had been taught to believe about herself and her place in that house. She attacked Timea with a blunt instrument, striking her in the head. Timea survived. She did not wait to see what came next. She left the house with her newborn son, made her way first to Canada, and eventually returned to Hungary years later. She was the only person in that household who got out, and it was partly her testimony, given to Hungarian authorities long after she had left, that eventually helped investigators understand what had been happening inside that house on the quiet street in Molenbeek. What follows is a chronology of 6 confirmed murders. Each one was constructed to look, from the outside, like a voluntary departure. Edith Fintor, 1986, age 44. Edith was the first to die. Shortly after her murder, Pandi walked into a local police station, visibly distressed, voice slightly unsteady, and filed a missing persons report. His partner had abandoned him without warning, he explained. She had been showing signs of mental instability for some time. She had probably gone to Germany, or perhaps further. He was worried about her. He hoped police might be able to locate her. The officer on duty logged the report. Police made routine inquiries. No evidence of foul play was found. The case was flagged as a voluntary disappearance and moved to the inactive pile. Andrea, Edith's youngest daughter, 13 years old, disappeared around the same time. Pandi told anyone who asked that she had gone with her mother. Nobody pressed further. Ilona, Daniel, and Zoltan. 1988. 3 people vanished in the same calendar year. Pandi's former wife Ilona Soresh and their 2 adult sons, Daniel, age 27, and Zoltan, age 22. Pandi's explanations shifted depending on who was asking. France, he told some. South America, he told others. Israel came up in at least one conversation. The story changed with the audience. When investigators later pressed him on specifics, he produced postcards. Physical postcards, handwritten and postmarked, allegedly sent by the missing family members from Miami, from Brazil, from Tel Aviv. The handwriting appeared plausibly similar to samples on file. Forensic document analysis eventually determined the postcards were forged. Tunda, 1990. The final confirmed murder was Tunda, the eldest of Edith's daughters. She was in her mid-20s. When Agnes eventually confessed, she refused to describe this death in the same detail she gave for the others. She confirmed that Tunda had been killed. She could not, or would not, say more about the specific circumstances. Investigators believe this was the one murder that Pandi committed alone, without Agnes present. Whether that is correct has never been confirmed. 6 people. 4 years. Not a single criminal investigation opened. The physical process by which Pandi and Agnes disposed of 6 human beings was reconstructed in full during the investigation and presented to the court in precise detail. Each victim was killed inside the house. The cause of death in the confirmed cases was either a single gunshot wound or blunt force trauma to the skull, both methods quick enough to minimize struggle and both leaving a body that then needed to be systematically destroyed. The dismemberment was carried out in the basement, using kitchen knives and axes. Agnes participated directly in at least 5 of the 6 cases. Her confession described the mechanics in language so flattened by psychological numbing that investigators found it almost harder to process than the physical evidence itself. She said, "It was my job to remove the organs while he cut the rest. You have to apply force. It is not easy. The only thing I remember clearly is that it was cold." The disposal involved 2 stages. The first stage used a commercial drain cleaning product called Cleanest, available in any hardware store, marketed for unblocking pipes. Its active ingredient was a high-concentration industrial acid. Investigators calculated based on purchase receipts and store records that Pandi had acquired at least 21 liters of the product over the relevant period. Organic tissue, flesh, internal organs, softer bone, was submerged in the acid until it dissolved completely. What the acid could not process was the hard calcium structure of mature teeth and certain dense bone fragments. These survived. They settled into the basement floor. They were what the forensic team found in October 1997. The second stage involved the remaining skeletal material placed into heavy-duty plastic bags and transported by Pandi personally to an industrial slaughterhouse in the Anderlecht district of Brussels, where they were disposed of with standard animal waste. The facility processed hundreds of tons of organic material weekly. Nothing was flagged. Nothing was examined. During the trial, prosecutors presented a demonstration video, a controlled forensic experiment showing biological tissue placed into a container of Cleanest. The footage ran for approximately 4 minutes. At the end of those 4 minutes, there was nothing visible in the container. The courtroom was silent. Pandi watched the screen without expression. Agnes turned her face away and did not look back. For nearly 11 years, the system worked perfectly. Between 1990 and 1997, Pandi continued living in Brussels, teaching, attending church, maintaining his congregation, while constructing an increasingly elaborate architecture of deception around the 6 deaths. His most audacious forgery was not a document, it was a person. After Belgian investigators first began showing serious interest in the missing persons cases in the early 1990s, Pandi traveled to Hungary and hired 2 young women, both in their early 20s, who bore a vague physical resemblance to his dead stepdaughters, Andrea and Tunda. He paid them. He gave them basic biographical details, names, ages, a few personal facts about the women they were portraying. He told them they were participating in a rehearsal for a biographical film about his life. They had no reason to doubt this. They agreed. Pandi then brought them to meet Hungarian acquaintances, extended family members, former neighbors, community contacts, and introduced them by name as his daughters. He organized small gatherings. He encouraged conversation. He documented the visits with photographs. Afterwards, he asked those same acquaintances to write letters to Belgian authorities, not formal testimony, simply personal correspondence, confirming that they had recently seen Tunda and Andrea, that both young women appeared healthy and well, and that there was clearly no reason for concern. Multiple people wrote those letters. They meant every word. They had no idea what they were participating in. One witness, a widow named Margit Magyar, testified at trial. He brought two young women, approximately 22 to 24 years old. He introduced them by name as Andrea and Tunda. They seemed normal. I had no reason to doubt what he was telling me. It was only later, when I understood the full picture, that I realized what I had participated in. Alongside this theater of impersonation, Pandi constructed a second layer of social legitimacy. In 1989, following the Romanian Revolution and the fall of Nicolae Ceausescu, images of thousands of abandoned children in Romanian state institutions shocked the world. Pandi responded publicly and visibly. He established a charitable organization dedicated to supporting Romanian orphans. He named it YDNAP, his own surname written backwards. Using funds donated to the organization, he purchased 2 additional properties in Brussels. An unspecified number of Romanian children passed through those houses over the following years. Hungarian investigative newspaper Népszava later reported that the ultimate fate of several of those children had never been officially confirmed. Belgian and Romanian authorities provided no complete public accounting when asked. One more near miss had come even earlier, in 1989. A Dutch Protestant pastor, a colleague who had personally known Edith Fintor, became increasingly troubled as years passed with no word from her. He wrote formal letters to the Brussels Judicial Police requesting a proper investigation. When that produced no response, he took the extraordinary step of writing directly to Queen Fabiola of Belgium, appealing to her personally to ensure the case was examined. The letters reached the palace. They were forwarded to the relevant authorities. Police visited Pandi at his home. He delivered his standard performance, the grieving partner, the bewildered father, and investigators left without further action. The case was closed again. Around the same period, construction workers excavating near a canal close to his house unearthed what appeared to be human bones during routine digging. A report was filed. The bones were examined. No connection was drawn to any outstanding missing persons case in the area. Pandi read the local newspaper the following morning and continued his day. To understand why 1997 was different from every year before it, you have to understand what Belgium looked like in the 12 months preceding Pandi's arrest. In August 1996, police arrested a man named Marc Dutroux, a convicted pedophile from Charleroi who had abducted, imprisoned, tortured, and killed multiple young girls over a period of years. 2 of his victims were found alive in a concealed dungeon beneath his house. 2 others had died of starvation while Dutroux was briefly imprisoned on an unrelated charge, and while police, who had received specific tips about his property, had reportedly declined to search it properly. On October 20th, 1996, an estimated 350,000 people marched through Brussels, in a country of 10 million. They wore white. They carried photographs of the victims. It became known as the White March. It was the largest public demonstration in Belgian history. And it was not a protest against one man. It was a protest against a system that had allowed children to die while the paperwork sat on someone's desk. A parliamentary commission established to investigate the failures released findings that were devastating. Investigators had overlooked evidence. Procedures had not been followed. Communication between police forces had broken down entirely. The Commission's final report concluded that the systemic failures had placed the rule of law itself in jeopardy. Under this pressure, every prosecutor in Belgium was looking at their closed files differently. The complaint filed by Andras Pandy in 1992, a formal accusation of rape against her father, shelved for insufficient evidence, was pulled from the inactive pile and re-examined with fresh eyes. In November 1997, senior prosecutor François Monsieur called Agnes in for a new round of questioning. The session began badly. Agnes was evasive, contradictory, repeatedly retreating from the edge of disclosure. She would approach a specific detail and then pull back, confirm small facts, and deny larger ones. After several hours, Monsieur made an unusual decision. He suggested they step outside, into the small courtyard of the prosecutor's office. Just to walk, he said, to get some air. They walked in silence for approximately 30 minutes. When Agnes came back inside and sat down, the quality of the silence was different. She was still for a long moment. She looked at the table, then she looked up, and she said quietly, "I will tell you how we killed 5 people." The confession took 2 full days. Agnes described each murder with a precision that left investigators with no doubt about her direct participation. She described the weapons used, the sequence of events, and the specific locations within the house where each stage of the process had taken place. She described her father directing proceedings with the same calm authority he projected in every other area of his life. Methodical, patient, unhurried. She described her own role in language so stripped of emotion that it felt less like testimony and more like a technical report filed by someone describing a task they had performed many times. When asked how she had managed to carry out what she was describing, she offered no dramatic explanation. She said only, "I had no choice. I had never had a choice. He told me what to do, and I did it. That is how my entire life worked." On October 20th, 1997, the first anniversary of the White March, Andras Pandy was arrested at his home in Brussels. The date was not planned. It was coincidence. Belgian journalists noted it immediately. It appeared on front pages across the country the following morning. The symmetry was not lost on anyone. Forensic teams searched multiple properties connected to Pandi across Brussels in the days and weeks following his arrest. They recovered human teeth, bone fragments, hair samples, blood-soaked wall sections, and 2 refrigerators containing biological material that required laboratory analysis to identify. On April 24, 1998, Norwegian forensic experts, brought in for their independence and specialized expertise in this area, delivered findings that went far beyond the 6 confirmed victims. DNA analysis of the teeth and bone fragments recovered from the basement established that the remains came from at least 8 separate individuals, 7 females estimated between 35 and 55 years old, and 1 male estimated between 18 and 23. None of the DNA profiles matched any known member of the Pandi family. None matched Ilona, Daniel, Zoltan, Edith, Andrea, or Tunda. 8 people, unidentified, no files, no families who had formally reported them missing in Belgium. They had arrived in that basement from somewhere, and no one, not Belgian investigators, not international databases, not Interpol, could determine who they were, or how they had gotten there, or when. Hungarian investigators, working cold cases in parallel with the Belgian inquiry, identified approximately 60 unsolved missing persons cases from the 1980s, all women, all fitting the profile of Pandi's newspaper advertisement targets. Single, economically vulnerable, drawn to the prospect of a better life in Western Europe. A formal legal connection between those 60 cases and Pandi was never established. The cases remained open. And then, in the middle of all of this, came a question that nobody had thought to ask until the investigation was already deep into its second year. Was the man in custody actually who he claimed to be? Documents uncovered during the inquiry suggested that an individual named Andras Pandy, born 1927, matching every biographical detail the suspect had always provided, had been officially registered as deceased in Hungary in 1956, the year of the uprising. Belgian investigators raised the formal possibility that the man in custody had assumed the identity of a dead man when he crossed the border. This was not an uncommon practice among people fleeing totalitarian regimes in that era. You took the papers of someone who no longer needed them, and you built a life on their name. If that was what had happened here, then everything before Pandy's arrival in Belgium was unknown. His real name, his real history, his real origins, all of it potentially constructed from the beginning. Hungarian authorities searched a property in Dunakeszi, north of Budapest, a house with 6 connected basement rooms with a documented connection to the Pandi family. The search was conducted. Officials reviewed what was found, and then Hungarian authorities issued a brief, carefully worded statement describing the property as the site of an old family tragedy and declined to provide any further detail. No formal finding was ever published. The question of who Andras Pandy actually was before he became Andras Pandy was never officially answered. It remains open. The trial of Andras Pandy and Agnes Pandy opened in the Brussels Assizes Court in early 2002. The physical and testimonial evidence against both defendants was overwhelming. Agnes had confessed to 5 of the 6 murders with a precision that was corroborated by forensic evidence at every point. The legal questions before the court were about degrees of responsibility, the mitigating circumstances of Agnes's lifelong abuse, and what sentence was appropriate for a 74-year-old man who had never once, in 5 years of detention and investigation, acknowledged that anything criminal had taken place. Pandy's courtroom behavior had a consistency that observers found more disturbing than almost anything else about the proceedings. He showed no distress, no remorse, and no recognition that his situation was in any way extraordinary. He sat in the defendant's dock with the same small, calm smile that colleagues had always described, and engaged with the proceedings as though they were a bureaucratic inconvenience he was patiently waiting to resolve. He called the trial a witch hunt driven by media hysteria. He told the court that the missing family members were alive, that he was in regular communication with them. When pressed to explain the mechanism of this communication, he stated, without any apparent irony, that he spoke with them through angels. He told the jury that when he was released, he appeared to consider this a certainty, the family members would come to visit him, and the matter would be conclusively settled. When a prosecutor asked him directly why, after 4 years of systematic searching by Belgian, Hungarian, Slovak, Romanian, and international authorities, not one of the 6 officially missing people had been located anywhere in the world, Pandi answered without pause, "Justice must prove for itself that they are dead. When I am released, they will come and visit me." 5 separate psychiatric evaluations conducted over the course of the investigation and trial described him consistently as an antisocial, paranoid personality. All 5 noted the total and unvarying absence of empathy across every interaction during the proceedings. One evaluation stated that examiners had found no observable psychological mechanism through which remorse could occur. Agnes, in her final statement to the court, said, "I had no way out. I was completely in his power. I have been in his power since I was a child. I do not know how to explain to people who have not lived this what it means." Prosecutors had requested 29 years for Agnes. Her legal team presented extensive psychiatric evidence documenting the systematic abuse she had endured from early adolescence, the destruction of her individual identity, the near total absence of autonomous decision-making across her entire psychological history. The court weighed this carefully. On March 6, 2002, the Brussels Assizes Court delivered its verdicts. Andras Pandy, life imprisonment, convicted of the murder of 6 family members, the rape of 3 women, and 1 count of attempted murder. Agnes Pandy, 21 years, convicted of participation in 5 murders and 1 attempted murder. She was released on parole after serving a portion of her sentence. The conviction closed the prosecutable portion of the case. It did not resolve it. The 8 unidentified individuals whose remains were found in the basement remained unidentified. No further DNA matches were ever found. No families came forward to claim the profiles on file. No missing persons case anywhere in Belgium, Hungary, Slovakia, or Romania was ever successfully linked to those remains through legally admissible evidence. The children who had passed through the YDNAP Foundation and the properties connected to it were never fully accounted for publicly. Requests for information from Belgian and Romanian authorities produced no comprehensive response. The 60 unsolved missing persons cases in Hungary remained open. No charges were ever filed in connection with them. Pandi spent the first years of his imprisonment in Leuven prison. He made no confessions, gave no interviews of substance, and consistently maintained, to anyone who asked, that the people he had been convicted of murdering were alive and well and would one day prove it. In 2013, his health deteriorated significantly. He was transferred to the prison facility in Bruges, which had better medical infrastructure. He filed a formal petition for early release on medical grounds. The petition was reviewed by the relevant judicial authorities. It was denied. In the early hours of December 23, 2013, the night before Christmas Eve, Andras Pandy died in the medical wing of Bruges prison. Natural causes. He was 86 years old. Belgian Justice Ministry spokeswoman Lieselot Blijenberg confirmed the death in a brief official statement. There was no ceremony, no public mourning, no final confession, no last gesture toward the people he had killed or the people he had spent decades systematically destroying. He left nothing behind that resembled accountability. He died as he had lived in that courtroom and in that house and across all the decades in between, giving nothing away, taking everything with him. The terraced house in Molenbeek, where 6 people were killed, dismembered, and dissolved, has since been demolished. The street looks different now. There is no marker, no memorial, no sign that anything happened there. Neighbors who moved in after the demolition know the story only if they looked it up. Most did not. The teeth and bone fragments belonging to 8 people who were never identified remain in a forensic evidence archive somewhere in Brussels. They have no names. They have no graves. No one ever came to claim them. They responded to a newspaper advertisement. They crossed a border looking for something better, a job, a relationship, a life that felt less stuck. And then they disappeared into a basement in a quiet neighborhood in a small European country, and the world moved on without ever knowing who they were. Some of them may have had children who are still waiting for them to come home.